Hi, I'm Jerome Braggs. I had two near-death experiences in 2004 and 2005 that completely changed my life and transformed me into the person I am today and the work that I do today. My first near-death experience happened on January 1st of 2004. So on New Year's Eve of 2003, I had checked into the hospital. I had been having flu-like symptoms for several days and they weren't improving. I'd been trying everything I knew how to do. I was doing the chicken soup, I was doing the water fast, I was doing all those things. And my health wasn't improving. And I had called my mother on New Year's Eve because New Year's Eve was always, back in that time, it was very special for me. I like to go hang out, I like to party, I like the whole idea of bringing in a new year and a new me. And so the fact that I was sick on New Year's Eve and couldn't really go out or do anything really bothered me. So I wanted to get over this as fast as I could. And so I called my mother. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and my mother was in Oklahoma. And I called her and I said, hey, can you prescribe me some medicine so that I could get better? This feels like the flu. And she told me, she couldn't prescribe medicine over state lines. So she suggested that I go to the hospital and just be seen and get some medicine so that, I could get better and that I could go back to work in a few days. And I went to the hospital. I had somebody take me to the hospital. And when I got to the hospital, I was meeting with the doctor in the emergency room. And I said, I think I have the flu. Here's what my symptoms are. I've got fever. I'm weak. But I noticed I had some swelling in my body as well. She said, okay, we'll take some tests and make sure it's the flu and give you some medicine and you'll be able to go home. Well, when she came back from the test, probably an hour or two, several hours later, she came back with two things that were different than what she had come into the room with initially. One, she had a team of doctors behind her and they were all coming in. Right. There was about 5 or 6 different doctors that were with her. And second, she had a telephone in her hand and she said, you have a call. And at this time, right, that was kind of weird to me because there weren't a lot of people that knew me to be calling me at the hospital. And I had just moved to DC like months before that. I just graduated from college and I had moved to DC to work my first professional job. And so I didn't know a lot of people like that for somebody to be calling me at the hospital. So I was kind of just like, what is this? But I took the phone and I said hello. And as soon as I said hello, I heard my mother. And she said, hey, I'll be there in the morning. And then she hung up the phone. And I knew that if my mother was going to be there in the morning, going to catch a red-eye flight from Oklahoma to DC, I knew this mustn't be the flu some type of way. And when I handed the phone back to the doctor, that's when they surrounded my hospital bed. All the doctors surrounded my hospital bed, and the doctor that had been seeing me said, son, you don't have the flu. Instead, you have kidney failure, you have pneumonia, you have pancreatitis, seems you have a fluid-packed lung, you have a parasite in your stomach. And if all that wasn't delicious enough already, she also said I had AIDS. And she said, I think you have about 7 days to live. What the prognosis of this, how this has progressed and all this has progressed in your body, looks like you probably have about 7 days to live. But we're going to try and do everything we can, but it might be a good idea to try and get your affairs in order. And they left the room after that. And I had this moment, right? Because here I am 24 years old. And I had just been told I'm dying from a space where I thought I had the flu. I did not think all of that was going on by any means. And I was just in shock for a second. As the shock began to kind of wear off, right, I began to think about the reality that I was told that I was dying. And as I began to lay on the hospital bed by myself, thinking about this, all of a sudden, I began to have what I now know and now understand was a life review. And all of a sudden, my entire life began to flash before my eyes. I say before my eyes, but it was kind of like just this, almost like a movie screen. And I was seeing clips kind of my life and how I had lived my life and the choices I had made and the choices I didn't make. And as all of this was kind of going on and I was seeing my life and like all the way back from like childhood to that point, as this screen was going and I was viewing my life, there were questions that came up. there were kind of 5 questions that kept coming up. And the questions were, was I happy with the life that I had lived? Was I happy with, how I had lived my life and the things that I had done and the things that I hadn't done? Was I happy with that? And then the next question was, had I ever really been myself in my life? Like, had I ever been my true self? Had I expressed my true self in my life? Had I been authentic? And the other question was, did I feel good about myself? Did I feel good about who I was? Did I appreciate and accept this Jerome that had been living this life? And had I expressed how I truly felt about the people in my life to them? Did they really know how I really felt about them? Had I really expressed how much I cared about them, how much I loved them? Was there anything that was going to be left unsaid? And then the last one was, did I feel like if I died, I was going to die having deposited in my life the purpose for why my soul had come to this lifetime, right? Like, had I lived my purpose? Had I fulfilled my soul's mission? So as this screen was going, these questions were going, and I was reviewing all of this and thinking about all of this with these questions in tow, right? So as I was looking at all of this and I was dealing with the fact that, like, oh my God, I'm 24 and my life is about to end, I was processing all of this. And there was a thought also that I wasn't afraid to die. I wasn't afraid of death. It wasn't when I wanted to die, right? I thought I had many more years to live, but I wasn't afraid of the concept of dying, because at that time I was 24, but I had been kind of on a spiritual journey for several years before that. And I had come to a point where I fully understood that I was a soul having a human experience, fully believed that. And with that, I fully believed that death was not the end of my soul. It might have been the end of my physical life, but it wasn't the end of what my soul is. I believed that, right? And so I wasn't scared of dying, but as I was going through this life review and going through what I thought my answers to my questions were, I began to feel a deep sense of terror. And again, the terror wasn't that I was getting ready to die. The terror was coming from the fact that I realized as I was going through the life review that my answer to all of those questions was no. I hadn't been happy with the life I had lived. There was a lot of things I didn't feel like I had lived my dreams. I didn't feel like I had truly ever been myself. I wasn't happy. I was doing work at the time that wasn't really what I wanted to do. It was what I thought was going to make me money. I was working as a case manager and counselor for men with HIV and AIDS, Black men particularly with HIV and AIDS. And while the work was good, it wasn't what I really wanted to do. I wanted to sing at that time. I had literally moved to DC to try and be a singer, and I wasn't singing anywhere. I was feeling lonely, and I just wasn't feeling like I was really fulfilled in my life and that I was really feeding my soul. And so I wasn't really happy. I wasn't feeling like I had been true to myself. There were parts of me that I was still hiding, that I was suppressing, particularly my sexuality. I was suppressing my intuitive gifts. Growing up as a kid, I had awareness of intuitive gifts. Like, I knew how people really felt and what the truth of them was. No matter what they were saying, no matter what they were presenting, I could always tell what the truth of them was. And I knew that that was an intuitive and a psychic gift. But I grew up in a very traditional Christian home. And so I never expressed that. I wasn't really made to feel like that was a safe thing to talk about. And so that part of me was suppressed. I lived with a pattern of wanting to be liked. And so I never really spoke up for myself, like spoke up what I really believed, what my real opinions were, for fear that if I did, people might reject me, they might not like it, I may lose approval. So I had never really been my true self in that way. And I didn't really express how I really felt to other people because, again, for fear of being vulnerable. Like, if I was vulnerable in that way and I told you how much I really love you, or I told you how much I really adore you, and you didn't feel the same way, or you didn't adore me in the same way, that type of rejection would be too painful for me at that time. And so I never really expressed it. I had a kind of almost cartoonish way of not really saying I love you or not really saying to people how much I cared about them. And so there were many people in my life, parents and friends and lovers, that if I died at that moment, they would never have known how I really felt about them. And I didn't feel like I had lived my purpose. There were dreams and inner callings and inner yearnings that I was very clear about that I wasn't pursuing, right? I had moved to DC, like I said, to be a singer. I had always been yearning to sing on big stages. And there were other things. Again, I was on a spiritual path and I'd been really called to share what I knew about the soul and what I knew about the spirit and creating and all of that. And I wasn't really doing that in the way that I had been feeling that I wanted to do. And so all of this, as I was pursuing all this, what I realized was that I was getting ready to die not having truly lived Jerome's life. That I had been given this one opportunity to be a Jerome in the world. And that's where the terror began, because I felt such deep regret that I was getting ready to die and I had never really honored being Jerome. And from that space, and as the life review ended and the awareness to those questions was complete, I knew that I didn't want to die like that. I knew that it was getting ready to be my time, but I didn't want that for myself. I wanted to live. I wanted to survive, because I wanted, the deep desire that came up for me during this life review was that when I faced my death, I wanted to be able to look at my life and those questions, and I wanted to be able to say yes. Yes, I was happy. Yes, I'm true with myself. Oh, and yes, I felt good about myself. That was another thing. Like, I did not feel good about myself. I had a lot of shame. I lived the majority, actually all of my life up to that point, was in shame, right? I felt shame around my body. I was teased a lot as a kid around the shape of my body. And I was a thicker kid, a bigger kid. So I felt like my body as it is was unlovable and unattractive. I had shame around my sexuality. I had shame around my intuitive gifts. So I lived with a lot of shame, and I didn't really feel good about myself. The only area I felt good about was my intellect. I always felt smart. I was always appreciated and praised for being a brilliant and smart kid. But the other areas of my being, I wasn't. And so I had a lot of shame around that. So I wanted to be able to die being able to say yes to all of that stuff, right? So I made a decision on my deathbed then, after the life review, that I was going to survive, that I was going to live, and I wasn't going to die in 7 days. I was going to live. And I began to throw everything I knew at the time about creating our own reality at my situation. I had been on a spiritual path for a few years. I've been a student of the law of attraction. I believed that we can manifest our reality, but I had used that kind of belief before to like get $5 to go to the movies when I didn't have any money on a Friday night. But this was a more serious situation. Like, if this was true and I was a soul and I was the reality that I lived was mostly in my control, then I was going to have to be able to create a miracle. I was going to have to be able to create a miracle for myself in 7 days or so. And I began to do an appreciation and gratitude journal 3 times a day. I began to do visualization exercises. I literally had the social worker at the hospital bring me a 3D model of kidneys to my room so that I could visualize healthy kidneys. I could visualize myself having healthy kidneys. I changed my diet. I did a positive bubble around myself so that the doctors, they could not tell me bad news directly. So my parents were my buffer. So if the doctors came to tell me results of a lab test or something like a surgery they were preparing for me to do, they had to tell my parents first. And then my parents would relay it to me. But they would relay that information to me. They would process it and relay it to me in a way that wouldn't make me scared, that wouldn't make me lose hope, but that would make me hopeful, that would make me more relaxed. They would tell me the truth of what was said, but it was more in a way, they would tell me in a way that didn't make me afraid, right? Also, every night before we went to bed, we would tell each other 3 things we loved about each other. And we'd have to tell each other 3 different things every night. And we had to go to each person and tell them 3 things we really loved about you around your entire life. And so I just did all these things, right? And I was in the hospital for a month. I was placed on dialysis. And after every week that went by, right, I got more excited because I knew, like, I'm going to live. But the doctors never really confirmed that for me. Like, there would be after 7 days, it'd be like, okay, we think you just have maybe a few more weeks, or it turned into maybe you'll have a month or a year, or then it turned into you'll be on dialysis for the rest of your life. Well, I was released from the hospital after a month, and I was on dialysis and still had some of the illnesses going on. And when I went home, I still did all of these things. And 2 months after I was home, my body fully healed. My kidneys came back to full function. They couldn't fight HIV or AIDS in my system anymore. And all the other illnesses had disappeared. And I was being called a miracle child. They didn't understand how this could happen. They were saying they'd never seen anything like this. But I knew that it was kind of my decision from what I knew from the life review to change my life, and also the things that I had been doing. I thought I figured it out. I was like, I figured out how to manifest, and I figured out, what it takes to really heal the body, right? I thought I just knew all of that. And I thought I knew all of that until I found myself back in that same hospital a year and a half later with the exact same diagnosis, to the T cell count. And instead of 7 days to live this time, I was given 48 hours. Different doctor I was seeing this time. This was like a male. And when he checked me into the room, he was like, I gotta go, called your parents, everybody's coming up right now, but we're going to try and do some type of immediate surgery. So we need to prep the surgery room and everything for you, because we're going to try to buy you a day or two. And so when he left me, I was on my deathbed alone again, a second time. But instead of having a life review this time, I had a knowing and a question. The knowing that was sitting in my body was that this wasn't a coincidence. That if I was back in the hospital on my deathbed again with the exact same things, like every single illness was back, and after I had fully healed before, that this wasn't a coincidence. That instead of a coincidence, it was a message. That it was a message from my soul. It was my soul attempting to communicate with me about something that apparently I had been really trying very hard not to pay attention to. And so I knew that. And the question that came up from that knowing for me was, what is it that my soul wants me to know through this? What is it that it's been trying to communicate to me that I haven't been listening to? And also, what does it take to really heal? Like, I wanted to fully heal. I wanted to really heal my body and be well, and not just be healthy, but I wanted to live a well life. A life that helped me meet and answer, all those questions from my first life review, helped me answer all those yes consistently, that I was happy, that I was true to myself, that I expressed how I really felt, that I felt good about myself, that I was living my soul's purpose. And what was key to living a life like that felt really good to me and that was really healthy and well. And it was right after I asked that question, because I literally asked it out loud. Like, while I was laying on my back, I literally just asked it to the universe and my soul as a whole. And right after I asked that question, I began to have what many people describe as a near-death experience. There was nobody in the room with me. And I know many other people that have had near-death experiences, there are people around them in some type of way that witnessed that they crossed over, that they died. There was nobody in the hospital room with me at this time. But what began to happen was, all of a sudden, after I asked that question, I began to lose sense of where my body started and ended. And what I mean by that is, all of a sudden, the bed and the room and the air in the room and the machine next, it all began to feel like it was me. Like there was no separation. There was no endedness. There was no, this is the end of my hand and this is the beginning of the bed sheet. It was like a melting into this feeling of oneness with everything. Like I was one with everything. And then at the same time that I felt this dissolving into oneness and away from the contrast of me and another, or me and this other thing. As soon as I began to feel that, I began to sense this bright light. It was like the brightest light I've ever seen, but it wasn't hurting my eyes. And at the same time, this is kind of hard still for me to describe, but it was this bright light. It was like the brightest light I've ever seen. And then it was the darkest dark I've ever seen. It was like this thing happening at the same time. Like it was bright and it was dark. And then when I experienced this, I began to hear the voice. And I say hear, but it wasn't like I heard it in my ears. It was like my cells, it was in me. right? And I heard this voice, and then immediately when it said, I knew as soon as I heard it that this was the voice of Source. Like, this was the voice of what we call God. And I knew that this was Source. It was, again, it was a knowing and it was a feeling. And except the voice sounded a lot like me, but the non-neurotic me, the me that wasn't riddled with shame and was suppressed and all that. It felt like the me that was centered and had always been centered in well-being, like the me that didn't know anything else but that didn't know anything else but well-being and love. And as the voice spoke, it said to me, and this is what I can remember. I have a feeling that there was more that was shared to me, but I can only remember these two things. And the voice shared to me that the key that I had been asking about on my deathbed to healing the body and living a really well life, a life that would taste very good to me and feel very good to me. The key to both of those things is the same thing. And that key is to wholly love myself. That wholly loving ourselves heals the body and it creates and manifests a life that feels like heaven on earth. And the second thing it said was that I had known and I had learned a lot in my lifetime about how to make life be good to me. I knew how to force it. I knew how to push. I knew how to manipulate and try and get the good that I wanted. But I didn't know about how to let life be good to me. And that life was designed for each of us to be good to us. That is its dominant intention, that is what it wants more than anything, is to be good to us. But in order to experience that, we have to learn to let it. And I didn't know anything about how to let life be good. But I was going to learn that as well. That the journey that I was going to go on after my near-death experience was going to deeply teach and show me how to use self-love as my greatest medicine, how to heal myself through the practice of self-love, how to create a delicious life for myself through self-love, and how to let life be good to me and to move through life and to move through the world in a way where life just constantly is good to me. After the conversation, I began to come back kind of into reality. The light and the dark began to come back into the dim hospital lights again. I began to kind of feel that my hands were on the bed. I could feel where my fingers were and that the bed was separate from my fingers. I began to hear the drip of the IV and the hospital machine again and the sirens or whatever that were going off on the hospital machine. And I knew that I had just had an experience, right? That I had an experience with the other side and a direct experience with Source, and that I had been given the big spiritual wake-up call moment. This was my moment. Was I going to continue how I had been? And there was one more thing that happened at that time too. When I came back into the body and had this awareness that I had been given the big wake-up call moment, there was a download. So this was kind of different than the direct kind of communication. It felt like a download into the body. It was a download of a knowing. And I knew that what I was getting ready to learn was going to be my purpose on the planet. How to use self-love to heal, and how to use self-love to create and manifest your own heaven on earth, and to let life be good to you. That was going to be my calling here. I was going to be called to teach people this around the world. But I also knew at the same time that who I used to be was going to kill me. I was going to die. Like, if I continued being who I was going to die. But if I surrendered and I offered my life over to this journey into learning what self-love really was, how to love myself fully, and how to use it as my medicine to heal, and how to use it as the real key and secret to manifesting a life that I really would love, that would save me. That was going to be the savior. And so I, almost like the Matrix in that moment where they have the red and the blue pill, right? I took the pill that was going to change me, and that was going to let my old life die. And that was another fear too, because I knew the old Jerome was going to have to die right then, right in that moment. On this hospital bed, there was going to be a death. Even though I was going to live, there was going to be a death. The old version of me was going to have to die, and that I was going to have to be a whole new thing. A thing that I didn't know anything about. And I said yes to that. What I didn't know was that at that time, and I'm glad I didn't know because I don't know if I would have taken the pill if I knew, that that journey was going to take me many, many, many years. That there was a lot that was going to have to happen for me to really understand what self love is. And that to understand that loving ourselves is really about embodying, uplifting, and nourishing the energy and essence of our soul. That this energy and essence was a very high frequency, it was a very high vibration, and that to live in that way, I was going to have to really undo everything I had learned, all of my social conditioning. I was going to have to heal all of my trauma. And I was going to have to take all of that and rebuild it on the truth of my soul, which was, which I learned many years later through many different experiences, one of which was after my near-death experience, my psychic and intuitive gifts opened. I became a medical intuitive. I began to be able to see the energy in people's bodies and see how well they were embodying their soul's energy, how well the soul's energy was fed through their lives, and be able to see how the lack of that energy in their body was directly causing the certain illness and health challenges they were experiencing. That experience helped me understand where my own lack of my soul's energy had been in my body. Again, the shame that I had carried. And I didn't know this at the time, but that was really what my life review was showing me in the first near-death experience was you weren't being yourself, and that drastically depleted your soul's energy through your body. You didn't feel good about yourself. So instead of feeling worthy, which is an aspect of the energy of the soul, because the soul's energy is love. So instead of feeling worthy and a deep feeling of self-appreciation and self-acceptance, I felt shame. And so that had depleted my soul's energy in my body. Instead of expressing and feeling the courage to express how I really felt and taking the courage to live vulnerably and transparently, I suppressed my feelings. I hid my feelings. And that suppression, repression, and hiding depleted my soul's energy again. Right? It kept my soul from expressing through me in this lifetime. I wasn't living my purpose. I wasn't following my dreams. I was scared, right? I was scared of failure, people's rejection, and getting shame. Because of all of that, that had kept me from doing the things that really my soul wanted to do in my lifetime, but also that fed my soul, right? I learned this as well. The soul needs to be fed. It is here in this lifetime to grow within us, to grow through us. Our purpose is part of what feeds our soul, as well as our passions. I wasn't involved in my passions enough. Instead, I was doing what I thought would get me accolades or approval or money. And instead of what would feed me, would make my soul feel more alive in my body. When we're not appreciating ourselves, we also starve our souls. We deplete the energy. So I began to learn all of that through my work. Once my intuitive gifts opened, and I was a medium. I talked to souls on the other side. They shared again with me like how they wish they had lived their lives and what they would focus on, what they want their loved ones here still living to focus more on. And I learned through all of that, like doing the medical intuitive healing work with people and doing the mediumship work with people, about what actually helps us express our soul and what helps us feed our soul so that our soul is growing in our lifetime instead of shrinking. And that when it shrinks, when we're not expressing our soul and we're not feeding our soul shrinks within us. And that shrinkage is actually the real root cause of chronic illness and disease. And it took me years to really understand that, and to understand that's what my life review was trying to tell me, like literally how I got sick. And when I learned that, and I learned instead of about just the affirmations and buying ourselves nice things, but every day, how can I express the truth of my soul? How can I honor it? What can I do every day to feed it some type of way? Just like my physical body. As I began to learn that that was what self-love was really about, and I began to go deeper and deeper into the practices of that, I began to heal again. My life began to turn into something that was more delicious than anything I could have ever imagined was possible for me before. And again, the more we love ourselves, the higher our energy goes, the more higher our vibration goes, the higher frequency we have, because our soul is flowing through us more, and our soul is the highest frequency available to us. And so great things began to manifest for me. And as I moved through this world with authentic soul expression and living a life that nourished my soul, life began to be really good to me. Life just is good to me at every turn. Things work out for me. And now I move through the world with a trust that I know that life loves me. And I know that all it's asking for me is to let it. And how I let it is to love myself. And I'm truly grateful for those experiences, right? I know that people say, there's a common belief out in society that disease is, an enemy that we have to go to war against, and that it is a punishment in some type of way, or a failure some type of way. But I truly understand now that from my near-death experiences, that disease doesn't come to end our life. It comes to help us save it. That it is not an enemy, but a sacred teacher. If we take the perspective that it has something here to teach us and something here to help us, that we'll begin to go through a journey where the disease can help. It became my master teacher after my near-death experience, and it taught me how to come back home to the truth of my soul, how to live and express who I really am. Like, I don't hide anything anymore. I'm now do work that is solely in my intuitive gifts, where before I hid that, I'm fully out with my sexuality. I don't have any fear or shame around that anywhere. I speak up. I speak my mind. I speak up for myself. I hold my boundaries. I say what I really believe, even if it's not popular, even if it'll make me lose approval. And I feel really free and really happy being that. And I also live a life, instead of focusing on money or the accolades that people would give me with approval, I live based upon what really fulfills me, what really makes me happy, what feels most fun for me. And I feel like if I faced my death again tomorrow, I would be able to say yes to those questions, and I would leave, instead of with regrets, I would leave this lifetime with a feeling of satisfaction. And in a very real way, I have AIDS and kidney failure to thank for that. They were a wake-up call for me, and they helped me wake up and change my life. Thanks for listening to my story. If you'd like to learn more about me or more about my story, you can find out more about me at the description box below, and know that I help people that are in the same situations now, spiritual seekers dealing with chronic illness and disease, learn how to heal themselves and create beautiful lives through the practice of self-love, which is why we're all here. Thank you.